Okay, so let's get this show on the road. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending the second of the Aspire Hub's series of webinars, all about careers in corporate responsibility and sustainability. I'm really excited to be hosting today's session, which is all about a day in the life of a CR&S professional. We've got three amazing panelists here today who's going to take you through a day in the life of their roles as CR&S professionals. And hopefully, you guys should be able to get a real understanding of what it is to both break into the field and what a day in the life in the field actually looks like. I will throw it over to each of my panelists to introduce themselves in a second, but firstly, as an introduction to myself, my name's Jacob Ayanamai. My day job is a consultant at EY, but I'm also massively interested in breaking into the CR&S field myself, which is why I'm super excited, much like I'm sure all of you are, to hear from our panelists today. So firstly, we have Andy Wright, who is Head of Sustainability at Greencore. Andy, I don't know if you want to give yourself a brief introduction.
Morning all, thanks Jacob. So I head up an 8-person strong team in a food manufacturing business called Greencore. Greencore are probably the biggest food business you've never heard of. So we've got 18 food manufacturing sites throughout the UK, and we supply all of UK retailers effectively, including Sainsbury's, which is where I know Charles from.
Fantastic. Cheers, Andy. We've also got Matt Sparks, Head of Sustainability at Linklaters. Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Matt. I look after sustainability, which to us means everything that entails making us a responsible business. So I might talk about that a bit in later, but everything ranging from our social impact programs, environmental diversity, but also how we go about doing business. And my role has grown, I guess, as the agenda has grown. And I was involved with ICRS from setting up at the beginning, so it's great to be part of this today.
Fantastic. Cheers, Matt. And finally, we have Uzma Ahmedmunir, Senior Associate in the Employee Volunteerism team at Salesforce. Uzma?
Hello, everyone. I'm Uzma Ahmedmunir. I work in the Employee Volunteerism team, and I look after our UK volunteering program at Salesforce. What this means is that I build relationships with charities, non-profits, education organisations, and I engage our employees to volunteer for their programmes. I'm really excited to be part of this panel and to learn from my fellow panellists. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, just to get things started and to warm everybody up, could each of you tell me and our audience a bit about your journey to your current roles and how you managed to land your current positions? So I'm going to start with Uzma, because Uzma's on the screen at the minute.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about my journey. So I always thought that I wanted to go into a career in science because I used to love it at school. And I was thinking about being a pharmacist, which is what I was sort of leaning more towards. So after A-levels, I didn't want to go to uni because I wasn't sure if that's the career pathway I wanted to choose, or, it was also for religious reasons because I didn't feel comfortable taking a loan at that time. So I did an apprenticeship in a pharmacy. And when I completed that, I realized that while I enjoyed the apprenticeship format, working in a pharmacy environment wasn't really for me. So I decided to do another apprenticeship in business administration. And that's when I came across the role at Salesforce. I hadn't heard of Salesforce before that, but the role really appealed to me. It sounded really good. So I applied for it. And yeah, I've been a part of the Citizen Philanthropy team ever since.
Fantastic. Amazing. And Andy?
So I think I was very lucky in terms of how I've got where I was. So I did a degree in environmental management back in the 90s when there was a Labour government and education was free, and it was halcyon days. And I think there was only 2 universities in the UK that did an environmental management degree at that time. So it was definitely early days. And I'm sure loads of you guys will be familiar with the challenge of breaking into this space. The key point was to go and get a job in consultancy, you needed 3 years experience, but how do you get 3 years experience? It was always the challenge. So I was really lucky in that a tutor of mine at university was a industry professional who ran his own consultancy but came in to lecture at the university, and he gave me a job. So I got my first job in consultancy and spent a number of years in consultancy. I wasn't a great consultant. I hate doing what I'm told. So if someone says go left, I go right, and I couldn't stand the you must write a letter in this format kind of stuff. So I'm a bit of a rebel, couldn't hack it. So got poached actually out of the consultancy role to go and work for some of the businesses that I was consulting in. And at that point, took a job in the food industry, which was 15 years ago. And I've kind of moved around the food industry ever since.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. And last but not least, Matt.
Yeah, so for those of you who still don't know where you're going, I didn't know where I was going at the beginning. Ended up at Barclays on a graduate job, and then stayed there. Got involved in volunteering then, just as a regular employee volunteer, but then a role came up which I took, and that was a sideways move. So first top tip, it's hard to move across and up, I think, at the same time. So I moved across to get a regional volunteering sort of coordination job, which was in the West Midlands. Then I worked in London for Barclays doing some of the national stuff, just got the opportunity there. And then I left for sorts of reasons, but principally left to join a charity for 3 years, wanting to get some experience the other side. So I ran a charity, helped set one up for 3 years, partly to get experience of what it's like on the not-for-profit side, but also partly to get some experience in running something, actually taking accountability for something. And then after the 3 years, and that turned out to be quite a good move, I guess, because I picked up lots of sort of management skills as well as I say, not-for-profit experience. And I guess that probably sort of fast-tracked me a bit, because I wouldn't have got that experience so fast within a big corporate like Barclays. Got me to the Linklaters job, which happened to come up at the time, looking after community. And as I say, since then, that was 2008 when Lehman's collapsed soon after I left the charity. So it was good timing from my perspective, because charity funding's sort of gone downhill ever since, and role of business and responsibility has gone up ever since. And yeah, the remit has expanded since then, from that sort of social impact side, as I say, to right across the brief now. So a mix of fortune and the odd sort of jumpy move.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, guys, so what you can see here, we've got a really diverse range of ways of getting into the industry. We've got, through the apprenticeship route, through consultancy, and through jumping around for a lot of different roles, which is fantastic. But I did want to ask to each of you, what was that spark that made you realize that you wanted to work in your chosen area? What was that thing that sort of gravitated you to knowing that where you were now is where you wanted to stay? I can see Matt on the screen pondering the question.
So I think for me, I mean, I was always very keen on the social side of what the business was doing. And I liked the idea that business had a bit of a responsibility outside. I did a much maligned geography degree, which actually quite a lot of CR people seem to have done geography, because I think it shows a sort of an interest in quite a lot of things and how they all fit together. And I always liked the idea of having foot inside an organisation and a foot outside. And that's been the exciting bit, because I think there's too many businesses sort of live in a bubble. For no fault of anybody in there, but to be that person with a bit of a view outside. So Julia Cleverdon, who set up Business for Community, she had this line that CSR used to stand for common sense, really. And I think that's actually quite a sensible little line, to be honest, because I think a lot of it appears to be common sense. Maybe it isn't, but I what gets me excited, what I like about it is the fact that you've got a lens in both directions, outside and inside, and of course, all being well, you could achieve a lot more in a business, leverage a lot more, make much greater impact in a business than you could outside. That's the argument, I think.
Fantastic, and I absolutely love that line. I'm going to start using it myself in my day job. Okay, Uzma, did you want to jump in?
almost sort of discovered that this is my passion sort of by accident. So I did do some volunteering work before, but I didn't realize that this could be a career pathway. I didn't realize this job was a thing until I saw the opportunity and I sort of jumped at it. And yeah, ever since I started working this role, I've sort of realized it's just really fulfilling being able to connect people. It's about every little interaction that you have, whether it's with a charity nonprofit, whether it's with a student, whether it's with a volunteer who've been able to give their time, and it's just really been fulfilling and satisfying. It makes me want to like get up and go to work every day. So yeah, which is why I've sort of really enjoyed and stayed in this area.
That is amazing to hear. And Andy?
Yeah, I suppose building on the backs of what's already been said, really, but I think that I'm trying to think, the word spark you mentioned, Jacob, and I'm just trying to think back to that. And I think ultimately it was, my dad ran, he was the managing director of a really big building firm back in the 80s. And I just remember understanding what was going on in his firm and going to visit. And everyone was just treated dreadfully. And it was just, profit. That was what everyone was up to. And I just remember at the time thinking, I'm just not interested in that. I can't be asked to go to work to make money for somebody else. I just don't get it. And I suppose that was a spark for me to try and do something a little bit different. From then on, I think I've just done the next thing in front of my face, if I'm perfectly honest. So it was, I'd love to tell you I'd got a grand plan, but it was literally, I'm going to go and do this because I can't do anything else. And then I'm going to go and do this because this happened. And then I'm going to go and do this because someone was going to fire me because I was rubbish at being a consultant. So it's just a pathway. And I think whatever pathway that is, it leads somewhere. And, just because you have one bad experience doesn't mean that the next one's not going to be great.
Amazing. And that what you said just at the start really does resonate with me. And I hope it does resonate with a lot of people. The idea of not being motivated or driven by profit. I think the thing that really does bring us all together, especially our panelists, the fact that we are people motivated by trying to make the world a little bit of a better place. And that's something that is actually really awesome. And it's great, we're hearing from people that have shown that you can have a career in that area. Okay, what I'm also going to say to the audience is if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I can throw them to our panelists. But for now, I'd love to hear from each of our panelists about a typical day. I know that is sometimes the most awkward question because no 2 days are the same. But if you could give us, the audience, an outline of some of the tasks, the roles, and the responsibilities you get up to as part of your role. And Andy, you've got the unfortunate responsibility of being on my screen. So I'm going to ask you to go first.
So I think that's the bit I love about my job is it's very, very varied, but a typical day. So I manage a team of 8. So part of my job will be on a day-to-day basis, ensuring that the guys that report into me are happy, know what they're up to, got any challenges, and support them with those challenges. And then there are definitely technical aspects to my role. So I'm here today as the E in ESG, but I do have a much broader sustainability role. So yeah, it could be from a technical perspective, it could be undertaking a report on our scope 3 footprint. It might be energy management. It could be reviewing human rights in the supply chain. It could be looking at food waste and food surplus donations to community groups. It's a very broad range, but effectively, let's just bundle that into technical stuff. But actually, a point that's probably worth making is the longer in the tooth you get, and possibly the more senior in your career you get, the less good you get at the technical stuff. So I don't have to do technical stuff anymore. I've got people to do the technical stuff. So I've got experts in different areas. And actually, if you're not careful, you can de-skill in that regard. So I don't spend much of my time doing technical stuff as much as supporting others. but a lot of the time is then very varied in terms of a board meeting, discussing how we embed sustainability targets within remuneration targets for execs, meeting customers to talk about joint programs on sustainability, or briefing teams around the business on aims and what we expect from them. So really broad, but I suppose a lot of engagement, a lot of speaking, a lot of chatting to people.
Amazing. And Matt, do you find that you've had a similar experience in your role, or is it something completely different? I know we've got people from the ES and G in ESG. So if there's any differences, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I saw I was billed as the G, and I've never had that compliment before. So yeah, but I thought I'll just have to take a look at today. So clearly this is the highlight of today already. So early on, speaking to you guys, I'm then into the office and have a meeting at lunchtime about our CR committee, which meets quarterly. So a meeting with the secretary about that. We've got a meeting in 10 days' time. So what the papers, what timings, who do we need to bring in? So that the sort of paperwork of our own governance. After that, I've got an update about a strategic review that's going on our half of the business to see what's going on there. Then I've got an hour with a charity partner that we work with. After that, an hour on carbon, partly around, well, mostly about TCFD for those who are familiar with that, climate-related risk disclosure. One with half an hour with the consultant, half an hour with one of our guys. I've then got an hour on our Race Champions program, which is part of our race action plan, which some of the team are presenting at, possibly one person on the call. Then I've got a board meeting for charity for a couple of hours towards the end of the day, and then 10 o'clock unusually this evening. So this is an impressive one on one hand or bad one on the other to share with you. I've got a conference planning call for a conference that happens to have a lot of US participants, hence the antisocial time, but that's 10 till 11. That's not the normal end of day, I have to say. But yeah, varied. I mean, and really quite, I would say, quite privileged, I know, because dabbling in quite a lot of interesting things. Picking up Andy's point, there is a risk you become a sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. But there is an element of, it's not so much knowledge for me now as it is, I think, ability to sort of bring people together, bang heads together, get stuff done through other people in the room.
Fantastic, and I'm very impressed about with how busy your day is. Please definitely take some time out for a break. I'm worried. But thank you for that, Matt and Uzma. Please do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea of becoming a jack of all trades or master of none, as Matt put it. Do you find that it's the same in your role day to day?
I completely agree. It is a lot about connecting people and not about, making sure you have the skills. It's more about finding out who has the skills and who can sort of deliver on that. So yeah, all my days look really different depending on what projects or events I'm working on. The thing that is common is sort of like the process of, starting by having conversations to understand what type of support is needed. And then using the resources I have to support them or to connect them with other people who have those resources to be able to achieve their aims. So it could be anything from, organising a debate mate final for 150 students in the office or running a mentoring program virtually for refugees who are looking to enter the workplace. So the days could look really different. But yeah, that's what keeps things interesting.
Amazing. Thanks, Uzma. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, which I'm going to throw at you now. So I can see a couple of questions in here asking each of our panelists for some advice on how to break into the field of CRNS, especially for people who don't have relevant, or they may feel they don't have relevant qualifications or skills, or may feel like they're coming from a completely different field. Uzma, could I ask you to start?
Sure. I think, I sort of did it through an apprenticeship pathway, but something I've seen that works really well is to be really intentional and transparent about your career goals and to reach out to people, maybe on LinkedIn, which is a great platform for people who are already in those roles, to sort of learn from them. And something else that sort of really helped me not get into the industry, but to be successful once I'm here, is to have mentors and coaches. it's been really wonderful to have their sort of support in all aspects of your role, whether it's something intangible like confidence building or something more specific like presentation skills. So that's been really useful for me.
Fantastic, thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't get too hung up on qualifications. I think much more important than qualifications is experience, and that doesn't need to be sort of CR sustainability experience. I think what if you go by the fact that CR is broadly common sense for those who have that particular type of common sense, and you sort of think you've got that already, much more important is business experience. I think of real life experience to which you can apply that common sense or that responsibility, that sustainability knowledge, because I think there are lots of people coming out of universities and things with qualifications, knowing the theories but no experience of the practice, quite idealistic in some ways, and then quite disappointed when things don't work. Whereas I think if you've been in business, trying to move across, that's more useful, because you know how to sort of influence, where the sort of channels are, the power lies, the mechanisms, what's realistic in what time scale. You're probably coming to it a bit more sensibly, and I think that's actually quite a strong asset to have, one way or the other. I just see in the questions too a thing about the apprenticeship route, and I do think the CRS apprenticeship is a good one. I think once you're in the space, it becomes much easier to specialize and move across. You'll get to bump into your ED&I colleagues or your environment colleagues, or this, that, and the other, and then you can begin to maneuver yourself around. The first thing to do is get in. And as I said, in my experience, it was easiest to do that on a sideways basis from where I was already. If you're in a place that doesn't have a role already, then I guess agitating to create one, even if it's slightly at the side of the desk to start with, is a good place to start as well.
Thank you, Matt. And Andy, I'm just going to ask you a slight variation of the question, just based on another question that's come into the chat about looking at breaking into the sector in a more senior capacity. So if you're looking to make that mid-career jump rather than break in at a sort of entry level, I wanted to hear your thoughts, or if you had any advice on that.
I suppose it's the growth piece. I think actually Uzma and Matt, I'd echo elements of what they said wholeheartedly. So Uzma talked about mentoring, and I would say everybody, no matter what stage of your career you're at, needs a mentor. And obviously, if you can get a mentor in the space that you want to get into, that's even better in terms of how you might bridge that gap. And then Matt talked about experience of much broader business skills rather than necessarily technical expertise. And I think certainly in more senior roles, that's required. Well, it depends on the senior role. So, I mean, there's room for everybody. If you are a technical person who is all over the detail, and that's where you want to remain, then obviously becoming an absolute expert in your field is where you need to be. But from my perspective, it's far more about your ability to communicate with people, your organizational skills, your ability to influence others. And there's a lot in that in terms of how people can upskill themselves, how you become comfortable with this stuff. So I suppose this morning will be a case in point. At the start of my career, if you'd have said, oh, you're going on a call with 62 people to talk about your career, I'd have said, right, I need to prep a day in advance. I'm going to do some thinking about it. I'm going to make sure I know what I'm doing. Whereas now I'm old and I've done it a bit. I didn't give it 30 seconds. You just rock up and dance, basically.
I absolutely love that.
I look forward to that bit, Andy.
You know what, me too.
Can I just add something to that on the senior bit? There is a model that some have used, M&S is one, where they have a team of doers, but they bring in somebody senior with not so much experience, any experience sometimes, I think, in CR to sort of bang senior heads together to drive stuff through. So if you're senior and you've been about the business for a little while, they're often sort of the leadership roles, if you like, which is a bit frustrating sometimes for the CR person underneath. But you've got your bunch of experts, but they can't get the ear of the most senior people or get away with banging their heads together. But somebody else has been around the business for a while, who's got the credibility, can come in at the top and do that and open doors and enable opportunities that the CR guys can then take advantage of. So I think there is a sort of an interesting role there if you've got that really strong sort of leadership experience and credibility in a business.
Thanks, Matt. And just to stay on that topic, because that's actually quite an interesting one, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the other transferable skills that you think are key and can help somebody at any level break into the field.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah,
I'd say tenacity. I'm not sure if that's a skill actually, or just a sort of a quality, but you do need to keep pushing. I think that the trick is to develop a network of support and a network of friends across the organization. And as I mentioned before, be credible in your ask. So demonstrate that you recognize the pressures the business is under. Let's take now as an example. You know, we want to maintain our renewable energy level, but obviously energy prices are going up 3 or 4 times for businesses. So how do we make sure we honour our green energy commitment whilst keeping costs down? I need to manage that situation in a particular way to make sure we come out the other side with what we want, because the green agenda on its own is not enough, because there's real money involved. So I think that understanding of the organisation, being credible, being responsive, I would say, is a real quality, because quite often in this game, you get a bit of an opportunity, a little window of opportunity that you have to take. If you don't take it, it may not come again. A spark of interest from somebody senior, something in our case, something a client does or something a client asks about that would be forgotten about tomorrow. But because a client is asking, that really matters if you can make the most of it. So I would say opportunistic is probably the best word for that. And also being quite nimble. And because there's a wide agenda and you do have to jump from one thing to another. Being confident and honest when you don't know the answer, but pretty quickly getting it wherever you can. But I mean, I was, in a funny way, there's sort of broad, good business skills. You're just applying them to a particularly, I think, interesting part of the business.
Fantastic. Cheers, Matt. Andy, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, build on that, actually. I think, Matt, I might be making it up, Matt, but I think you talked about network support at the beginning of that, and I think that's really important. So I certainly see that with people that I know at my level, where the bit I talked about in the beginning, actually, about being purpose-led, not profit-led, is great and noble and whatever, but actually, in terms of burnout, can be a huge problem in the profession. In that, I don't know, if you're dealing with a human rights case down the supply chain, when do you stop work? When do you go, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I'll finish? You can't, because you want to do the best that you can for people. So, and that is a really big problem in the profession. I see lots of people suffering from burnout because it's and what I always say is it's a marathon, not a sprint. You've got to slow down to a marathon pace, not a sprint pace. Otherwise, that is a challenge. I think in terms of those core skills, the one I'd probably add on would be the ability to manage and have difficult conversations. There are a lot of difficult conversations that need to be had in my role, certainly. So ultimately what you're trying to do is embed sustainability into core business processes where it has never existed before. So whatever those processes are driven by cash, or depends on the business as to what the core metrics are. And what I'm trying to do is to say, look, that might have been enough in the old days, but we've got to broaden your scope. We've got to broaden your process. And that can be really, really difficult to do. So being good at difficult conversations is a great skill to have.
Always a tough one. If you have any advice on how to have those difficult conversations, I'm sure we'd all love to hear it.
Do you know what I've learned from others? But I think just name it. I think is just say what your problem is, say why you've got that problem, and I just call it out. And then ideally then offer some solutions as to how you can help alleviate it and make it better. But sometimes it's not even worth doing that. It's just own it. It's a bit like my wife's a GP. And sometimes you just got to break bad news. And the best way to do it is just do it. Get it over with. I remember a consultant that she worked with early in her career advised people not to start any long books, which I think is a particularly brutal way of advising people. But there is definitely a skill to it, but people normally react best to you just being really upfront and honest.
That is some really good advice, and definitely something that's relevant for people in the field of CR&S. Uzma, was there anything you wanted to add?
I completely agree with whatever Matt and Andy said. Being resilient is a great skill. Being ready and having a backup as well, because usually things will not go your way. So being reactive to that is a great skill. But I also think with any transferable skill, you are able to sort of get into different roles, because even within this area, there are lots of different ways and areas in which you can specialize. For example, if you're more of a data person, then you could go into impact measurement. For example, if you're really good with those social skills, then you can sort of inspire and engage people to support. So I think you can use whatever strengths you have and work on the sort of the character building, which you will get with experience. To get to where you need to get.
Couldn't agree more. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the three of you to sort of look on a bit of a more macro scale with my next question. Obviously, we are in unprecedented times, and I'm pretty sure everybody's heard that phrase a bit too much for our liking recently. I don't think I need to list everything that's happened in the past few years, but I'd love to hear the thoughts of the three of you on what you and your organization is doing to combat these challenges. So, Uzma?
Sure, I can have a go. So at Salesforce, we follow the 1-1-1 model, where we try to give 1% of our technology, our money and our time to nonprofits. And my role is sort of focused on that 1% of time. So every employee at Salesforce gets 56 hours of work time, which is about 7 days to do volunteering. Our strategic focus areas are actually education, workforce development, and sustainability, which is the sort of areas that I focus in. And I truly believe that education is the key to solving any of the world's sustainable development goal challenges. Whether that's ensuring that every child is sort of thriving, or teaching adults about the value of using sustainable energy sources. So I really think education is the key. When you talk about dealing with these sort of challenges that we face, we do have sort of like a wider strategy and a large philanthropy and equality team that focuses on different strategic areas globally. But we also have something called the disaster resilience team. So what this team focuses on is whenever a situation arises that needs sort of like an emergency response. So this could be like during COVID time, we ran a helpline to support the medical shortage in India, or to support people in Ukraine to try and provide food and medical supplies and information on getting access to support. So they sort of bring together experts and volunteers, people who have sort of different skills to be able to work on this and to try and work on it in a holistic way, to try and see all the different ways in which we can support to sort of deal with this one scenario. And that's how we sort of go about it.
Fantastic. And I really loved what you said about education being the key to solving our sustainability issues. I think it's amazing to hear what organizations such as Salesforce is doing in that area. So thank you for that. Matt, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I suppose more broadly, I mean, there's I talked about social impact very briefly. Ramping up what we do on the social side is clearly important. I think there's going to be much more attention and expectation on business over the next few years, because those of us, particularly in bigger organizations and particularly in successful organizations, if they stay successful, we'll begin to get further and further away from sort of the real lives of many people. And I don't think that's very helpful. So I think we've got a greater and greater responsibility to make sure that the success we continue to enjoy, for those of us who do, is shared as widely as it can be, because I think there's a risk otherwise that there'll be sort of more and more of a disconnect between the business bubble of success and lots of people left further and further behind. And the argument that breeds quite a lot of social discontent is probably quite a good one. So I think for our own good as much as anything else, we probably all need to visibly, which is the important bit as well, visibly up our game in terms of making sure that the spoils are shared a little bit.
Fantastic. And Andy?
Yeah, I was thinking about this in terms of, I could probably tell you about technical related things. So food industry, I work in the food industry. Food and its associated supply chains is probably only now second to kind of big oil in terms of the most impactful industries on the planet. So yeah, we could talk about rainforest deforestation, we could talk about soy and animal feed, we could talk about scope 3 emissions. There's loads of issues, but actually coming back to some of the earlier conversations, I think really the biggest stuff that I'm trying to work on is the core processes, which doesn't sound terribly sexy, but if you think about every business has core processes that it runs on. And if you're trying to do sustainability to the organization from the sidelines without using its core processes, then you're never going to embed into core business activity. So that's what I'm really trying to do. So things like we have a remuneration process. So the exec will get paid on how much profit they make, but also what sustainability metrics they manage to tick off. Everyone in the senior leadership team needs to have sustainability objectives that they will be performance assessed on. How we embed sustainability into commercial relationships. All these are kind of core processes that we really need to make sure that sustainability's got a seat in. And the difficult bit is, how do you get the inertia shifted to get from a situation of there is absolutely no way that conversation is going to take place to everyone takes it for granted and there's no opposition to the fact that you're going to build sustainability in. And we could probably do about 3 days on what that entails. And I'm happy to talk about that in a bit more detail, but overcoming that kind of institutional inertia is a huge piece. But once you start to do that, embedding it in core processes is where it's at.
Agree more. Thank you so much, Andy. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to be sending people off into breakout rooms. So Andy and Uzma have graciously volunteered to host people in breakout rooms, so where you guys can feel free to ask questions in a bit of a smaller group. Unfortunately, Matt does have to dart off, but he's been an absolutely fantastic panelist.
I didn't ungraciously not volunteer. I go to an appointment. But thank you. As I put in the note, if anybody would like to sort of, I'm sorry about it, they're very embarrassing, but do drop me a line with any questions directly. Feel free, anybody, to do that. I'm quite easy to find. And best of luck with it all. And thanks to Andy and Uzma for sort of carrying the load for the last 15 minutes.